Does the long-term outlook for BlackBerry still stand with its most recent earnings report? Well, let's dive in. What's up, guys? Welcome to Bullish Bets. On this channel, we cover all things related to stocks and investing. This video, we're going to talk about BlackBerry Q4 earnings report. Keep in mind that we're not financial advisors and this video is for entertainment purposes only. Make sure you do your own research before making any investment decisions. So BlackBerry Q4 earnings report were released yesterday, March 30th, 2021. Before the release of the earnings report, BlackBerry was hovering around $9.38 and 40 cents-ish. And with the release of the earnings report, the low today hit $8.36. This is around a 10% drop. So based off how the market reacted to the earnings report, it didn't seem like they liked what they saw. There was a negative sentiment overall. And I wanted to dig in deeper to look at the financials, look at the transcripts, and discuss the guidance of the company to see if the overall long-term thesis of the business still stands for BlackBerry. So let's dive into the income statement. So the revenue for BlackBerry this quarter, GAAP income statement, was at $210 million, and the analyst consensus forecast for BlackBerry were actually $245 million. Now, a lot of this was due to the fact that the licensing and so forth, were halted due to the fact that they're negotiating some patent sales. But that's not the only thing that's affecting the revenue. As I mentioned in my previous videos, we wanted to keep a close eye on software and services for BlackBerry in terms of revenue growth. Unfortunately, Q4 actually showed a drop in revenue. I also mentioned to keep an eye on sales and marketing and administration expense for the business in general, because this shows how much money they're making in terms of revenue for every dollar spent on sales, marketing, and administration expenses. So we built an Excel to indicate what we thought were important aspects of the income statement that we thought would speak more of BlackBerry's overall business model versus everything else, as it might be distraction in terms of amortization and so forth. So we increased software and service revenue, licensing, other revenue, total GAAP revenue, cost of sales, software gross margin, selling, marketing, and admin expense. And then we created a ratio of software and services divided by selling, marketing, and admin expense. And this pretty much explains how much revenue BlackBerry makes for $1 spent on selling, marketing, and admin. So like we mentioned, the software and sales revenue decreased by $2 million, and the licensing and other decreased by $6 million. That being said, analysts' consensus were around $245 million. I expected that, they thought that there was going to be around $70 to $80 million million dollars in terms of revenue that's coming from licensing and other. As I mentioned in our previous videos, we don't really care that much about the licensing and other because it doesn't speak much of what BlackBerry is doing right now in terms of their products and services. But that being said, the overall cost of sale decreased, which is a good sign in terms of Q4, and the software gross margin also increased. Unfortunately, selling, marketing, and admin increased also with the software and service revenue decreasing. This led to the ratio to drop 0.221, and this shows that it's going to require BlackBerry a little more money to make more in revenue just by increasing sales and marketing. So the percent change are right here. There was a around 5% drop from Q4 2020 to Q4 2021 in terms of software and service revenue. The licensing dropped by 55%, which we don't really care about because BlackBerry isn't really doing that anymore. But that being said, just to foreshadow, John Chen did talk about licensing revenue decreasing because they're in talks of potentially selling a patent and so forth, and this led to that halt in licensing revenue. And that being said, the overall cost of sales went down, software gross margin went up, the amount spent on sales and marketing went down, but the the return on seller and marketing expense increased by 15%, well, which is a good sign in terms of the overall bottom line and how efficiently BlackBerry is running. That being said, I did create a section for fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021, but I'm not going to go over that because 2021 had COVID going on, so it doesn't really speak about what BlackBerry is and what BlackBerry is doing. So I want to talk about now some business highlights and strategic announcements. Over the past 3 months of the end of the year, BlackBerry has been having a lot of good news. BlackBerry launched IV Innovation Fund to drive innovation and new products using BlackBerry IV, which I talked about in my previous video in terms of them trying to dominate the operating system market for vehicles, kind of like how Apple did with their iOS and Apple App Store. On top of that, their QNX design wins 23 of the world's largest 25 electric vehicle OEMs. So they nearly controlled 68% of the EV market in terms of controlling their operating system and working with them. So it's a good sign because data is heavily used in electric vehicles in terms of, they're very software driven. So BlackBerry is really gaining strong market share in that area. And I mentioned in my previous videos, it's very important. I want to also point out that Secu Suite for BlackBerry is now used by 18 governments, which is a good thing. And on top of that, BlackBerry Jarvis was named Best Breeds and Tools to Protect Mission Critical Software and Supply Chains. So what it's saying is BlackBerry has great products, and if they finally implement a better sales team, they have stuff to sell, they have products to sell that are worth buying, and they just need to fix that kink in the wheel, and it's potentially gonna look really well for BlackBerry. So I wanted to jump into some key points in the transcript that I highlighted. So John Chen mentions when they talk about Spark Suite, as a reminder, we launched the new Spark Suites in May and the Cyber Suite in October. Pipeline for our Spark Suite grew strongly sequentially, and typical sales cycle is going to be 9 months. So we're expecting a good second half for fiscal year 2022. So going back to this, like I mentioned in our previous video in terms of BlackBerry, mentioning growth more, it did show that they're willing to spend more on selling, marketing, and admin, but it didn't translate to a higher revenue in terms of software and services. And John Chen kind of hints at that or explains why that's happening a little by saying that there's a 9-month sales cycle. So this money needs to be spent up front for this revenue to increase. So it's going to take a little bit time, but it does show that they're ramping up sales and marketing. And based off our research on Tom Ecobachi, it seems like he knows what he's doing. They're a lot more focused on sales and marketing now, and it's just going to take a little more time for large corporations and governments to buy into the sales cycle. It needs to start somewhere, and investing this money up front, although it does decrease the ratio a little, it does show that they're moving in the right direction, and I'm excited to see what the revenue is based off their increase on selling and marketing. So I also want to talk about their overall guidance for next year. So for the guidance for cybersecurity next year, they're expected $495 million to $515 million in revenue, and the BTS, which is essentially QNX and IV, they're expecting a GAAP revenue of $180 million to $200 million. So the guidance for BlackBerry, in the worst case scenario for fiscal year 2020, is around $675 million in software revenue. And in terms of licensing and other, like he mentions in their transcript, they're not really going to talk much about licensing and other because they can't predict what the negotiations are going to come out to be in terms of selling their patents to Facebook and other users that might benefit from it. So, and I also mentioned that licensing and other It's helpful for creating cash, but it doesn't really speak much of the overall operations of the business anymore, because they're not in the business of selling licensing. They're in the business of, selling software and services. So this increase shows that this guidance, the worst case scenario, there's still going to be around a 7% increase of software and service revenue, which is a good sign. In the best case scenario, it's around a 15% increase to 750 million in revenue. On top of that, one good thing that came out of all this is that they're expected to have a early February release of BlackBerry Ivy. It's expected to ship fairly soon in next year. So, we were expecting a two year to 3 year timeline for BlackBerry Ivy to release, but it seemed like they increased the speed also. Another funny thing I wanted to bring up was that John Chen mentioned the McKinsey report that we kept bringing up of the market size of monetizing car data of $450 billion to $750 billion. It seems like John Chen is listening to what we're saying, and he also understands this in terms of the fact that it's going to be a huge space, and BlackBerry still has huge upside potential in the future. So like I mentioned in our previous videos, the revenue as a whole didn't matter much. We wanted to focus more on the software and service business part of BlackBerry. A lot of people came in expecting the licensing revenue to be around 100 million, 200 million from sales of patent to Huawei and the settlement of Facebook. That being said, that's still going on, but we were a little upset that we saw a 2 million decrease of software and services. But there wasn't, the bright side was, the sale and marketing did increase, and it shows that BlackBerry is willing to focus more on sales, which according to John Chen, the sales cycle is 9 months, so it's gonna translate into revenue later on, but since the short term is gonna be a struggle. But overall, the long-term thesis for BlackBerry doesn't change. It's still dominating and positioning itself in emerging markets. If we look on the bright side, it gives people who bought in at $21 and $18 a better price to average down on. And, it's going to be a huge growth company in the future, and we still believe that. But the short term, for the next few weeks or so, BlackBerry might be trading a little flat in our opinion, or maybe a little worse, unless there's a catalyst that is going to boost it up. What do you guys think? Do you think the earnings that just came out showed major weaknesses in BlackBerry? Or do you think, this short term doesn't really affect the long-term thesis and BlackBerry still has a bright future? That's it for this video. If you liked our content, please give us a thumbs up. We use this as feedback as to whether we're making content worth watching. Thank you very much again for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.